It was a rain-soaked night in the decaying heart of the city's industrial district. The streets beneath the flickering neon signs were slick with oil and water, deserted except for the shadows that moved with purpose through the darkness. Among those shadows, one man commanded the night, Zlatan El Niño, broad-shouldered, covered in tattoos that told stories of blood and territory, moving with the lethal grace of someone who had never known fear. He was heading toward the abandoned warehouse district, where his lieutenants waited, already calculating the distribution routes and payoffs he would approve before dawn, mentally reviewing which rivals would need to be reminded of his reach. As he walked, something unexpected pierced through his focus and pulled him from his thoughts. At the edge of an alley, pressed against the graffitied brick of a condemned building, he saw a young woman. Her clothes were tattered and soaked through, her dark hair plastered against her face, partially hiding her features. She was trembling violently from the cold, arms wrapped tightly around herself in a desperate attempt to preserve warmth. Because it was a merciless night, and mercy was something Zlatan had long ago forgotten how to give. Until now. He should have kept walking. In his world, weakness was currency for vultures, and stopping meant showing interest, and interest meant vulnerability. But something in the way she held herself, the stubborn set of her jaw, even as her body betrayed her with shivers, made him pause. Zlatan approached slowly, his expensive leather shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the broken city lights above. "You're going to die out here," he said, his voice rough, not quite a question. She looked up then, and despite the grime and exhaustion written across her face, her eyes held something he hadn't expected. Defiance. Not the reckless kind that got people killed in his business, but the quiet, burning kind that came from surviving things that should have broken her. "Maybe," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold, "but at least I'll die free." The words struck something in Zlatan he thought had died years ago, buried beneath concrete and blood and the weight of the crown he wore. He made a decision that would haunt him, that would unravel everything he had built. He reached down, offering his hand. "Not tonight." Gloria stared at his tattooed fingers, at the rings that marked him as someone dangerous, someone she should fear. But when you've already lost everything, fear becomes just another luxury you can't afford. She took his hand. The car ride to his estate was silent, except for the rain hammering against the windows. Zlatan told himself this was nothing, just a whim, a moment of weakness he would forget by morning. He would give her a warm bed, some food, and send her away with enough money to disappear properly. That was all. But as they pulled through the iron gates of his fortress, as he watched her take in the opulence built on other people's suffering, Zlatan realized he had just made the most dangerous mistake of his life. He had let someone see him hesitate. He had let someone see him care. And in his world, that was how empires fell.
Zlatan woke to silk sheets and empty space. The pillow beside him still held the indent of her head, but Gloria Smith was gone. He sat up sharply, a cold fury rising in his chest, not because she had left, but because some part of him had expected her to stay, expected her to be grateful, to cling to the temporary safety he had offered, like every other desperate soul who crossed his path. But the expensive guest room he had given her was stripped clean of her presence. The clothes he had left folded on the chair remained untouched. She had vanished wearing the same soaked rags she had arrived in, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness like smoke through his fingers. His head of security, Marco, stood in the doorway with the expression of a man delivering bad news. The cameras caught her leaving at 4:30, climbed over the east wall, didn't take anything, didn't trigger any alarms. She knew what she was doing. Zlatan's jaw tightened. A beggar who could scale a 12-foot wall topped with security sensors. A woman in rags who moved through his fortress like a trained operative. He replayed the previous night in his mind, searching for clues he had missed. The way she had held her fork at dinner, the precise angles that spoke of childhood etiquette lessons, the way she had said thank you in a voice that carried education beneath the rasp of exposure. "Find her," Zlatan ordered, though even as he spoke, he knew it was pointless. The city swallowed people whole, and if Gloria wanted to disappear, she would. Days blurred into weeks. His empire demanded attention, shipments to coordinate, territories to defend, traitors to root out. Yet in the spaces between violence and strategy, Zlatan found himself scanning crowds for a glimpse of tangled dark hair, for eyes that burned with that particular brand of defiance. It infuriated him. He was Zlatan El Niño, a man who took what he wanted and discarded what he didn't. Attachment was a weakness he had excised from his nature years ago. But late at night, when the estate fell silent, and even his demons knew better than to disturb him, he remembered the way she had looked at his world, not with awe or fear, but with recognition, like she had once belonged somewhere just as grand and had watched it crumble. Like she understood that beneath all his power, he was just as trapped as she was. Marco's investigators turned up nothing. No hospital admissions, no shelter registrations, no body in the morgue. Gloria Smith had evaporated, and with her went something Zlatan couldn't name, some possibility he had glimpsed for one rain-soaked night, the chance that he might be something other than the monster everyone feared. He told himself to forget her, told himself she was just another ghost in a life haunted by too many already. But her eyes stayed with him, those defiant, knowing eyes that had seen through everything he was and chosen to leave anyway. That haunted him most of all.
The war had been raging for 3 months, and the city bled. The Volkov Bratva had pushed too far into Zlatan's territory, mistaking his recent distraction for weakness. They learned their mistake in fire and blood, in bodies that washed up along the industrial docks, in supply chains that evaporated overnight. Zlatan had become the monster his reputation promised, colder and more ruthless than ever, as if trying to burn away whatever softness that one rainy night had awakened in him. He was in his war room when Marco burst through the doors, tablet in hand, his expression caught between confusion and alarm. Around the table, Zlatan's lieutenants, men who had survived by reading violence in the air, went silent. "We have a situation at the East Gate," Marco said carefully, and something in his tone made Zlatan's instincts flare. "Security caught someone trying to scale the wall, a woman." Zlatan didn't move, but every nerve in his body went taut. "And?" Marco hesitated, then turned the tablet around. The security footage showed a figure in the floodlights, hands raised in surrender, surrounded by 4 armed guards. Even through the grainy night vision, Zlatan recognized her immediately. The tangled dark hair, now longer, the defiant set of her shoulders, though her stance was different somehow, her center of gravity shifted. Then she turned profile to the camera, and Zlatan's world tilted. Gloria Smith was pregnant, heavily, unmistakably pregnant. The tablet clattered to the table as Zlatan stood so abruptly his chair toppled backward. His lieutenants exchanged glances, but knew better than to speak. The math clicked into place with the precision of a gun being cocked. 3 months since she had vanished, 6 months visible in the swell of her belly. "Bring her to my private study," Zlatan commanded, his voice deadly calm. "Now, and clear this floor. Everyone out."
The walk to his study felt longer than it should have. His mind raced through possibilities, through angles and deceptions, through every con he had ever seen run in his 2 decades ruling the underworld. This could be a play by the Volkovs, a perfectly timed infiltration using his one moment of weakness. It could be a setup, a trap, a bomb wrapped in the memory of rain-soaked vulnerability. But when they brought her in, when Gloria stood before him in clothes that were clean but worn, her hand protectively cradling her swollen stomach, all his calculations scattered like ash. She looked exhausted, thinner everywhere except where the child grew, her face carved with the particular weariness that came from surviving on nothing for too long. But her eyes, those burning, defiant eyes, met his without flinching. "Hello, Zlatan," she said quietly, and again he heard that educated accent beneath the fatigue, that ghost of refinement that shouldn't exist in a woman who claimed to be a beggar. "You have exactly 1 minute to explain, before I decide you're an enemy and treat you like one." Gloria's hand moved unconsciously over her belly, a protective gesture so instinctive it couldn't be faked. When she spoke, her voice was steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "I didn't come back for money or protection or whatever you think I want. I came back because you deserve to know the truth." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with something between fear and courage. "This child is yours, and carrying your baby has put a target on both our backs that's bigger than any war you're fighting." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of gunfire somewhere in the city. City, his war, and now, possibly, his child, walking straight into the crossfire.
Zlatan circled her like a predator assessing prey, his mind working through every angle, every possible deception. Pregnant women had been used as weapons before. Sympathy plays, distractions, Trojan horses carrying literal bombs beneath false bellies. But something about the way Gloria stood her ground, exhausted but unbroken, made his instincts scream that this was different. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk, "and start talking. Everything. Why you disappeared, why you came back, and what target you think you've brought to my door." Gloria lowered herself carefully into the chair, one hand braced against the armrest, the other never leaving her stomach. "My name isn't just Gloria Smith," she began, her voice steady despite the fears Zlatan could see flickering in her eyes. "It's Gloria Valentina Smith. Does that name mean anything to you?" Zlatan froze. The Smith family. Valentina Smith. He knew that name. Knew it from a file that had crossed his desk 7 years ago. Knew it from a night of fire and blood that he had been told was righteous justice. The Smiths had been a rival family, old money turned criminal enterprise, and they had been eliminated in a single brutal night, men, women, anyone connected to the bloodline. His mentor at the time, Clovis, had orchestrated it, had told him it was necessary to prevent a war. "The Smiths are dead," Zlatan said flatly, though ice was forming in his veins. "Wiped out in 2018. I saw the reports." "You saw what Clovis wanted you to see," Gloria said, and her voice cracked with old grief. "My father was Antonio Smith. My mother was Elena. I had 2 brothers, Marcus and David, and a sister named Sophia. We lived in the estate on Riverside, the one with the iron gates and the rose gardens my mother loved." She paused, tears tracking down her cheeks now, but her voice remained steady. "I was 15 when your people came, when they burned everything." Zlatan's floor shifted beneath him. He remembered that night differently. Clovis telling him the Smiths were planning an ambush, that striking first was survival. He had stayed back, managing logistics, while Clovis led the assault. When it was over, Clovis had reported total elimination of the threat, clean, necessary, final. "I was at a friend's house," Gloria continued, her words coming faster now, like poison she needed to purge. "A sleepover. When I came home the next morning there was nothing left but ash and bodies. The authorities called it a gas explosion. The other families knew better, but no one spoke up. No one helped the orphan daughter of a destroyed house." She looked up at Zlatan with those burning eyes. "So I disappeared. Learned to survive on the streets. Learned to be invisible, because being Gloria Smith meant being dead." Zlatan's hand moved to his desk, gripping the edge hard enough his knuckles went white.
7 years ago, he had been younger, hungrier, more willing to trust the men who had raised him in this life. Clovis had been his right hand, his mentor, the man who taught him everything about ruling through fear and respect. Why come to me that night? Why not run when you saw who I was? Gloria's laugh was bitter, because I didn't know who you were. Not until after. Not until I was in your home and saw the photographs, the insignia. Not until I realized I had slept with the man whose organization destroyed my family. She met his gaze without flinching. But by then, I was already carrying your child, and I realized something worse. What? That you didn't know. The way you acted that night, the way you looked at your empire, you weren't the one who ordered my family's death. You were just the weapon someone else aimed.
Zlatan spent 3 days tearing through 7 years of buried files, and with each document he unearthed, the betrayal carved deeper. He worked alone in his private vault, trusting no one, not even Marco. Because if Clovis had lied about the Smiths, then everything Zlatan thought he knew was potentially poison. Gloria remained under guard in a secure wing of the estate, protected but confined, while Zlatan excavated the truth from beneath layers of careful deception. The first crack appeared in the financial records. The Smith family hadn't been rivals plotting an ambush. They had been partners. Antonio Smith had been laundering money through legitimate real estate holdings, creating a network that would have revolutionized how the families operated. But the system required trust, required pooling resources across territorial lines. Clovis had been negotiating the terms, positioned to become the bridge between the old families and Zlatan's rising empire. Then the deal had fallen apart. Or, more accurately, Clovis had made it fall apart. Zlatan found the intercepted communications, messages between Antonio Smith and other family heads that Clovis had altered before passing them up the chain. Words changed, contexts twisted, until cooperation looked like conspiracy and partnership looked like threat. By the time Zlatan read the original versions, hidden in Clovis's personal encrypted files that took 2 days to crack, the manipulation was obvious. Clovis had engineered the entire conflict, then volunteered to lead the response. But it was the surveillance logs that made Zlatan's blood turn to ice. After the massacre, after the Smiths were supposedly eliminated, Clovis had maintained tracking on a single target, Gloria. The logs showed her movements over the years, photographed from a distance. Her descent from shocked survivor to street-hardened beggar documented with clinical precision. Clovis had known she was alive, had known exactly where she was, had kept her poor, desperate, and isolated. The question was why. Zlatan pulled up the Smith family's asset records from before the fire. Antonio Smith had been wealthy, but there was a gap in the accounting, a massive hole where something valuable should have been. According to the financial forensics, nearly $40 million in liquidity had vanished in the weeks before the massacre, not stolen, transferred, hidden, and only someone with Antonio's biometric signatures could access it, or someone with his bloodline. The vault door opened, and Zlatan's hand went to his gun before he recognized Marco's voice. "Boss, we have a problem. Clovis is asking questions about the woman. Says he needs to verify she's not a Volkov plant before you make any decisions about her." Zlatan's jaw clenched. Of course Clovis was circling. The moment Gloria had appeared at the gates, every security alert would have reached his right-hand man's desk, which meant Clovis knew Gloria Smith was alive, knew she was pregnant, and was already calculating how to eliminate the threat she represented. "Tell Clovis I'm handling it personally," Zlatan said, his voice deadly calm. "Tell him the woman checks out as a former associate, nothing more. Tell him I'm sending her away with money and a warning." Marco's eyes narrowed. "And what are we really doing?" "We're preparing for war," Zlatan said, gathering the evidence files, "because the man I trusted most in this world has been playing me for 7 years. He killed Gloria's family to steal their fortune, and he's kept her alive as a living key to access it. Now she's pregnant with my child, which makes her valuable in a completely different way." He looked up at Marco, and his expression was the one that earned him the name El Niño, the ruthless child who had clawed his way to power over the bodies of anyone who underestimated him. Clovis created this game.
Now I'm going to finish it.
Gloria sat across from Zlatan in his study, the evidence files spread between them like the wreckage of everything she had lost. She had spent the last hour reading through documents that confirmed what she had always suspected but never been able to prove, that her family's destruction hadn't been random violence but calculated theft. Her hands trembled as she set down the final surveillance photo, an image of herself from 2 years ago sleeping in a doorway while Clovis's operative watched from across the street. "He kept me alive," she said quietly, her voice hollow. "All these years I thought I was hiding, but he always knew where I was." "Because you're the key," Zlatan said, pushing a financial document toward her. "Your father moved $40 million a week before he died. Only someone with Smith family biometric data can access it. Retinal scan, fingerprint, and a passcode that only family members would know." He leaned back, studying her with those cold, calculating eyes that had first terrified her. "Clovis has been waiting for you to lead him to it, or for you to get desperate enough to access it yourself." Gloria's hand moved protectively over her belly. "I don't know where it is. My father never told me about any hidden money. I was 15. He kept me away from the business." "But you know something," Zlatan pressed, "even if you don't realize it. Something your father said, somewhere he took you, a phrase he repeated. Clovis wouldn't have kept you alive this long if you were useless to him." She closed her eyes, sifting through memories that felt like touching broken glass. Her father in his study, her mother in the rose garden, Sunday dinners where business was never discussed in front of the children. But there were fragments. Her father's hand on her shoulder, his voice saying, "Remember, Mija, home is where the heart stays safe." A phrase he repeated often, especially after her mother died. She had thought it was just comfort, just a father's love. "Home is where the heart stays safe," she whispered, opening her eyes. "He used to say that. After my mother's funeral, he said it every night before bed." Zlatan's expression sharpened. "Your mother's burial site?" "The family mausoleum at Riverside Memorial." Gloria felt something click into place. A puzzle piece she hadn't known was missing. My mother's maiden name was Corazon, Spanish for heart. "Elena Corazon Smith," Zlatan said, already pulling up property records on his computer. "The mausoleum would have biometric security. Your father would have had legitimate reasons to visit regularly, to maintain access." His fingers flew across the keyboard. "And nobody investigates a grieving man visiting his wife's grave." Gloria's faith felt the weight of understanding settle over her. $40 million hidden beneath her mother's final resting place. The fortune that had gotten her family killed, that had kept her trapped in poverty, that had turned her into a living key in a game she didn't know she was playing. "So what now?" she asked, meeting Zlatan's gaze. "You take me to the mausoleum, access the money, and then what? Kill me, like Clovis planned to?" Zlatan was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that felt like a vow. "You're carrying my child. That makes you untouchable. But more than that, Clovis played me for a fool, used me to destroy your family, and has been bleeding my organization dry while pretending to be loyal." He stood, moving around the desk until he was directly in front of her. "I don't pity you anymore, Gloria. I respect you. You survived 7 years of hell because of my ignorance. So here's the deal. We recover your family's fortune together. We use it to destroy Clovis and everyone who helped him. And when it's over, you decide what happens next, to the money, to us, to this empire I built on lies." Gloria searched his face for deception and found only cold, brutal honesty. "That's not an alliance. That's you asking for my forgiveness." "I'm asking for your trust, just long enough to make this right."
The plan had been simple. Retrieve the fortune at dawn when the cemetery was empty and Clovis would still be sleeping off the whiskey Zlatan knew he drank every night.
But simplicity was a luxury in a world built on betrayal, and Zlatan should have known that Clovis hadn't survived 2 decades in the Underworld by being predictable. The attack came at 3 in the morning, while Gloria slept in the secure wing, and Zlatan reviewed the mausoleum's security schematics. The explosion that rocked the estate's east wall was perfectly calculated, loud enough to draw attention, destructive enough to seem like a genuine breach, but positioned away from any critical infrastructure. A distraction, Zlatan realized too late, even as he was running toward Gloria's room with Marco and 4 armed guards. They found her door blown open from the inside, the 2 guards posted outside, dead from close-range shots to the head. Professional, surgical, the kind of work that spoke of someone who knew the estate's security protocols intimately, who knew exactly when the camera feeds would reset, who knew which guards could be bribed and which had to be eliminated. On Gloria's bed lay a single burner phone, already ringing. Zlatan answered it with a calm that belied the rage burning through his veins. Clovis. "Zlatan, my boy." Clovis's voice was smooth, almost paternal, the same tone he had used when teaching a younger Zlatan how to read a room for threats, how to identify loyalty from fear. "I'm disappointed. 7 years of brotherhood, and you couldn't even give me the courtesy of honesty? When were you going to tell me that Antonio Smith's daughter was sleeping under your roof? When were you going to tell me you murdered an entire family for their money?" Zlatan shot back, his voice ice. "Or that you've been tracking Gloria for years, keeping her desperate and broken so she'd never realize what she was worth?" Clovis laughed, and the sound carried genuine amusement. "I taught you everything you know about this business, but clearly not everything I know. Did you really think I wouldn't have eyes on every entrance to your estate? That I wouldn't notice when you started digging through old files, pulling records from the Smith case?" A pause, and when he spoke again, the warmth had drained from his voice. "You were supposed to be smart enough to stay out of this. The girl was my retirement plan, not yours." "Where is she?" Zlatan demanded. "Safe, for now. She and that bastard child she's carrying." Clovis's words dripped with contempt. "You are always too sentimental, Zlatan. Taking in strays, believing in honor among thieves. That weakness is going to cost you everything." A new voice came through the phone then, Gloria's, strained but defiant. "Zlatan, don't!" The sound of a slap, then silence. Zlatan's hand tightened on the phone hard enough the plastic cracked. "If you hurt her, you'll what? Come after me? Please do. I'm counting on it." Clovis's voice was all business now. "Here are my terms. You have 24 hours to sign over your territories, your operations, and your offshore accounts. Every asset transferred to shell companies I control. In exchange, I'll let Gloria and the baby live. I'll even let you walk away with enough money to start over somewhere far from here." "And if I refuse?" Zlatan demanded. "Then I take Gloria to the mausoleum myself, access her family's fortune with her biometric data, voluntarily or otherwise, and you can bury what's left of her next to her mother. Your choice, El Niño, your empire or your family." The line went dead. Marco stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "What are your orders, boss?" Zlatan looked at the dead guards, at the phone in his shattered hand, at the empire he had built on trust that turned out to be quicksand. Then he smiled, and it was the smile that had hardened killers nervous. "Get everyone, every soldier, every lieutenant, everyone who's ever owed me a favor. Clovis wants a war?" Zlatan's eyes burned with cold fire. "Then let's give him one he'll never forget."
Zlatan had fought wars before, but never one where everything he cared about hung in the balance. The intel came from sources he had cultivated over years: a corrupted police scanner, a paid informant in the harbor master's office, a terrified accountant who had processed wire transfers for Clovis's shell companies. Each piece of information pointed to the same location, an abandoned shipping facility on the industrial pier, the same territory where Zlatan had first found Gloria shivering in the rain. Clovis had always appreciated irony. They moved in at dawn, 20 men spread across the dockyard in the coordinated assault that Zlatan had planned with surgical precision. No mistakes, no hesitation, no mercy. Marco led the eastern approach while Zlatan took the main entrance, his weapon drawn, every sense heightened to the edge of violence. The first guards fell silently, throats cut before they could raise an alarm. The second wave met bullets that punched through the early morning mist with deadly accuracy. Inside the main warehouse, Zlatan found the inner sanctum, a makeshift command center surrounded by Clovis's most loyal men, mercenaries who fought for money rather than principle. They died for money, too, their loyalty evaporating in the face of Zlatan's relentless advance. Bodies fell, blood pooled on concrete, and through it all Zlatan moved like the monster his reputation promised, cold and efficient and utterly focused on one goal. He found Gloria in a storage room at the back, handcuffed to a support beam, her face bruised but her eyes still burning with that defiant fire he had come to recognize as strength. She was alive, the baby was safe, and that realization hit Zlatan harder than any bullet, that this woman and the child she carried meant more to him than every territory he controlled, every fortune he had accumulated, every throne he had built from the bones of his enemies. "I knew you'd come," Gloria said, her voice hoarse but steady as Zlatan shot through the handcuffs' chain. "Where's Clovis?" "Gone. He left an hour ago when the shooting started." She gripped his arm as he helped her stand. "Zlatan, he's not going after your empire anymore. He's going to the mausoleum. He said if he can't have you as his puppet, he'll take the Smith fortune and disappear." Zlatan's jaw clenched. After everything, the betrayal, the kidnapping, the years of manipulation, Clovis was still chasing money, still believing that wealth was the only power that mattered. He had never understood what Zlatan was only now beginning to grasp, that true power came from having something worth protecting, someone worth dying for. "Marco," Zlatan called out, and his second-in-command appeared, weapon ready. "Get Gloria to the estate. Maximum security. No one in or out except medical personnel I personally approve." "What about you?" Gloria asked, reading his intention in his eyes. "I'm finishing this." Zlatan cupped her face gently, his tattooed fingers careful against her bruised skin. "You and this child, you're my family now, the only family that matters, and I protect what's mine." The drive to Riverside Memorial took 12 minutes, Zlatan's car screaming through red lights with 2 chase vehicles flanking him. He found Clovis at the Corazon Mausoleum, kneeling before the biometric scanner with a combat knife in one hand and desperation carved into his face. The man who had taught Zlatan everything looked old suddenly, diminished, revealed as nothing more than a thief who had gambled everything on stolen wealth. "It's over, Clovis," Zlatan said, his weapon trained on the man who had been his mentor, his betrayer, his greatest mistake. Clovis turned slowly, and in his eyes Zlatan saw the truth he had been blind to for 7 years. Clovis had never cared about building an empire. He had only ever cared about taking one. "You really chose her over everything I built for you?" Clovis asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "A beggar and a bastard child over an empire?" "No," Zlatan corrected, and pulled the trigger. "I chose family over lies." The shot echoed through the cemetery, final and absolute. As Clovis fell, Zlatan felt the weight of 7 years lift from his shoulders. The empire he had built on Clovis's foundations was poisoned, but it could be rebuilt. Gloria's family fortune could fund a new beginning, a legitimate one if that's what she wanted. But more than that, he had found something Clovis never understood.
Wealth meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. Power meant nothing if you ruled alone. And empires meant nothing if they were built on the graves of the people you should have protected. Zlatan holstered his weapon and pulled out his phone, dialing Marco. "It's done. I'm coming home." Home. To Gloria. To his child. To the family he never knew he needed until he almost lost them. That was the only wealth that mattered.
3 months after Clovis fell, the city looked different through Zlatan's eyes. The territories that had once been battlegrounds were now negotiating tables. The violence that had defined his empire was being replaced, slowly, painfully, with something that resembled structure. Not legitimacy, not yet, but the foundations of it. The kind of power that didn't require constant bloodshed to maintain. Gloria stood beside him on the balcony of the estate, her pregnancy now in its final weeks, her presence commanding in ways that had nothing to do with the child she carried. She wore elegance like armor, her hair styled, her clothes tailored, every inch the daughter of Antonio Smith reclaiming her birthright. The families who had turned their backs when she was orphaned now came to pay respects, to acknowledge that the Smith bloodline had survived, and with it the $40 million that had been recovered from her mother's mausoleum. But it wasn't the money that made them bow, it was the woman herself. "The Volkovs are requesting a meeting," Marco reported, entering the study where Zlatan and Gloria reviewed the new organizational charts. "They want to discuss the Eastern Territories. They're willing to negotiate borders." Zlatan glanced at Gloria, who studied the maps with the same intensity her father must have once used. She had taken to the business with a natural aptitude that shouldn't have surprised him. She had been born into this world, after all, before Clovis had tried to erase her from it. "Tell them we'll meet," Gloria said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned her position through survival rather than inheritance. "But the negotiations happen here, on our terms, and make it clear that any agreement goes through both of us." Marco nodded, a slight smile crossing his face. He had been skeptical at first when Zlatan announced that Gloria would be his equal partner, not just his woman or the mother of his child. But she had proven herself in the brutal weeks of consolidation after Clovis's death, identifying which of the old guard had been complicit in the betrayal, which could be trusted, and which needed to be removed. She had her father's mind for strategy and her mother's grace under pressure, and she wielded both like weapons. "The lawyer called," Marco said after Marco left. "The documents are ready. Your family's assets, properly restored. The estate on Riverside is being renovated. It'll be ready by the time the baby comes." Gloria's hand moved to her belly, a gesture that had become instinctive. "I never thought I'd go back there. Never thought I'd want to." "And now?" "Now I think my father would want his grandchild to grow up where he grew up, where the rose gardens bloom and gates stand strong." She turned to Zlatan, her eyes soft in a way they rarely were when others could see. "She want our child to grow up different, not hiding from the business, but not consumed by it either. A choice, not a destiny." Zlatan moved behind her, his arms encircling her carefully, his hands resting over hers on the swell of their child. "We'll build something better. Not clean. I don't know if that's possible for people like us, but better. The families are willing to work together now because they see what we've built, not through fear alone, but through respect." "Through necessity," Gloria corrected, but there was warmth in her voice. "We control too much of the infrastructure now. The Smith fortune, your territories, the alliances you've secured. Fighting us would cost more than cooperating with us." Spoken like a true queen. She laughed, and the sound still surprised him, how something so light could exist in the darkness they inhabited. "Queen of what? A criminal empire held together by threats and treaties?" "Queen of the city," Zlatan said simply. "Queen of our family. Queen of the new era we're building from the ashes of the old one." He turned her gently to face him, his eyes soft in a way they rarely were when others could see. "Clovis taught me that power came from fear and control. You've taught me it comes from something more." "And what's that?" "Purpose, legacy,
something worth protecting beyond yourself. He pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture of intimacy that would have been unthinkable months ago, when he was still the cold and untouchable El Niño. You came to me as a beggar, and you've made me wealthier than I ever was. Then let's make sure our child inherits a kingdom worth ruling. Outside, the city sprawled beneath them, violent and corrupt, and theirs. Not perfect, but transformed. Not redeemed, but given a chance at redemption. And at the heart of it all, a mafia boss who had learned that the greatest power wasn't what you could take, but what you chose to protect. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, and both Zlatan and Gloria felt it, the future announcing itself, demanding to be born into a world that would be dangerous and difficult, and theirs to shape. The heir to the El Niño legacy, the last survivor of the Smith bloodline, a child born from violence and rain and one moment of unexpected mercy that had changed everything. Their new era was beginning.
If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Are you ready for part 2? Comment below and let us know. Also, tell us where you're watching from.